So welcome everyone to the July edition of the Cerini Nonprofit Connection. The pause brought about by the COVID pandemic has forced everyone, including nonprofit organizations, to think differently about how they run their organizations. I know we're seeing it in pretty much all of the clients that we work with. As part of this, many organizations were forced to work at least partially from home. So we're seeing a lot more of a remote work environment. And that also has caused a lot of organizations to really rethink what they're doing from a real estate perspective and what their needs are going to be. I can tell you, I had a conversation yesterday as we were preparing for this with Jane and Ámbar about this. And I've been saying, I'm really excited about today's topic, because we're going to kind of explore a little bit about what's happening in the real estate marketplace, what organizations need to be thinking about going back. So again, today we have with us Jane Brody, Executive Director of Vicus Partners, and Ámbar Margarida, Principal at Spacesmith LLP. And again, we're going to be talking a little bit about the real estate market. And while the purpose of this is really a nonprofit discussion, what we're going to be talking about today really impacts everyone, not just nonprofit organizations. So first of all, welcome and thanks for joining us today. Before we get started, I was hoping maybe if whoever or both of you can maybe jump in a little bit and talk a little bit about how you guys work with the nonprofit sector.
Sure. So Ámbar and I work together a lot. We love to work together because I typically work with nonprofits on figuring out what kind of their space needs are, and then Ámbar comes in and talks about design and configuration of space.
Right. So the way Spacesmith works with nonprofits is when a nonprofit is looking to renovate their space, or Jane has found them a wonderful new space to lease or buy, we come in and make sure that the spaces will fit their needs as the architects and interior designers. And we work through space assessments all the way through design and construction until the client moves in.
And obviously with the pandemic, we're seeing a big swing in how organizations are utilizing space and the level of space they need. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how the real estate marketplace has really been impacted by the COVID pandemic. Jane, if you want to start with that.
I think what's really interesting is people are more comfortable with working from home than they ever thought. So we are certainly seeing organizations looking at smaller space, different kinds of space, and changing the way that they work and shrinking headquarters and moving towards local community spaces. So there has been an uptick in suburban spaces, outside of the borough spaces, and less emphasis on kind of Manhattan-based offices.
So it's kind of like a decentralization of offices, which normally you think that people want to centralize, but here it's decentralization because people realize that they can kind of function from wherever.
Yes, and also changing the patterns of how people work. So splitting the way workforces come into the office, but it all ties back to what kinds of organizations are they? Are they a medical provider and they need to see clients? Are they a distributor of perhaps a food pantry? So really space is derived basically by mission and function. So the important thing is, what do you need to accomplish in your space? And then everything kind of falls from design. And Ámbar has been working with a particular organization, SCO, in Brooklyn and Queens. That's a great example of reconfiguring how they function. Ámbar, you want to mention?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So for SCO, Family of Services, we are looking at consolidating multiple different leases within Brooklyn into one building. And we are doing the same thing in Queens and looking at what we're calling the mobile workforce and who is eligible to be part of their mobile workforce. Well, everybody is, we've figured out now, but what that means in terms of space is anybody who would normally spend 50% or more of their time outside of the office because they are providing services to their clients in their homes or elsewhere, that would be mobile workforce eligible, and they would be sharing space once they come into the headquarters or the satellite office in the borough to meet with their supervisors, file papers, go to meetings and trainings.
Is this going to be a permanent change, or is this a temporary change with then reconfiguration happening afterwards?
This is in terms of the mobile workforce, it is permanent and it is also reconfigurable. So what I mean by that is when, let's say, we go back to the office in 6 months or shorter, or whatever the time frame is, I'm going to use 6 months for the purpose of this conversation. If we go back into the office in 6 months, the mobile workforce will have a 6x6 space, which is the same space that is being given to supervisors and people who have an assigned workstation. However, this 6x6 space, once there is mass immunity, herd immunity, or a vaccine, will be converted into a smaller space, meaning that space that has 4 people now will have 5 people in the future, et cetera, without major infrastructure changes.
So one of the things that we're seeing as a result of this pandemic is the need to do planning, and as part of that planning, there needs to be flexibility built into whatever modeling that we're creating at this point.
That's exactly what we're doing.
Right. And again, I think that's extremely important. I think that's something that organizations need to start thinking about. So when they're going in and they're bringing people back and they're trying to reconfigure space, it shouldn't be hard reconfiguration. It should be quote unquote soft reconfiguration, so that when the time comes to maybe possibly move things back, that's easily to do.
Exactly. So movable components, mainly with movable furnishings.
So you talked about some of what you're looking at in terms of this mobile population of employees. What do you see, or how do you think, for the most part, nonprofits are going to have to reconfigure space moving forward when they start, bringing people back, and how is that going to look?
When they start bringing people back, we are going to be seeing so many different things in terms of the space. It will be, if you're in a high-rise building or in a building with an elevator, there will be social distancing cues on the floor saying stand here, 6 feet apart. Masks to be worn in every single public space in the building and inside the workplace if you're not sitting at your desk. When it comes to your desk, you can expect to begin a 25% capacity is what we're seeing with most of our clients. So if it's an office for 100, there will be 25 people at any given time. Those 25 people will be spread out, so no one will be sitting in the desk across from you or next to you. In terms of conference rooms, you will see chairs being removed, every other chair, or to provide a 6-foot distance. We're also seeing restrooms being closed. So if there's 4 stalls, you can actually only use the 2 stalls on either end. We're seeing pantries with everything being touchless. So from the soap dispenser to the trash cans to the water dispensers that companies lease, being touchless devices. Up cleaning, so physical cleaning at least 3 times a day of all of these common spaces. Clean desk policies where you leave nothing on your desk so that your desk can be disinfected every evening thoroughly. Those are some of the things we're seeing, Ken.
Okay. What about in terms of air purification or any changes in those types of things?
Absolutely. Thank you. So yes, so for the mechanical systems, if you have a ducted mechanical system, you're going to start seeing, well, you won't actually see it because the filters are not something that occupants to a workplace can see, but there should be confirmation, there should be signage that new MERV, higher rated MERV filters, MERV 13 or higher, have been installed within the filtration system for the mechanical units. If they are not ducted units, there are also physical air purifiers that you can see throughout the workplace.
And it's my understanding that when you're using those higher level filters, they need to be changed more often and more readily.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So again, it's all things that people need to think about when they're kind of moving back to the work environment. And that's, again, not something that, do you guys have a checklist or something that people should be following, or are there places where they can easily get checklists?
Absolutely. I can send you a link of resources to look at, and they provide checklists. The CDC has a checklist. We've made our own checklist, so I'm happy to share those with you afterwards. The CDC has made checklists for returning to offices, returning to retail stores, all of those things. All those.
Okay. So and we could do is when we push this out, we can kind of link the checklist to that, whatever checklist you want to push. So that'll work. I know, Jane, you mentioned something about there's been some level of consolidation within space and maybe nonprofits are utilizing less space. You think that that's going to be a common trend moving forward in terms of organizations utilizing less space, or do you think it's going to be, system as, things going back to normal down the road?
I think it'll be a combination depending on what people need to do in the space. Some people are talking about using more open space and still having the opportunity to have smaller rooms that can be multifunctional. So it's going to be a question of what kinds of services that you provide in your space. So I think we're not seeing necessarily the long-term impact when we go back to what the new normal is going to be. If this is going to take years or months or but I think nonprofits need to think about it in terms of their budgets, what they can afford, what kinds of services they need to provide, and what's their long-term strategy for space.
And I think there have been cutbacks within the nonprofit sector in terms of funding and everything. And I think the funding is just going to be tighter and tighter. So any place organizations can find ways to save costs. And again, one of the ways may be through diminished space and allowing certain non-essential people who don't necessarily have to be on site to work more remotely.
Definitely. And I think people are surprised how effective people are working from home and how the communication has been really impactful, like we are on today, Zoom calls.
And again, I think it's just a matter of implementing the appropriate technology. And I think through technology, and there's enough of it out there these days, that through technology, a lot of stuff can be done. And I know, Ámbar, when we were talking yesterday, you were talking about some of the technology that exists in terms of some of the reconfigurations and utilizing technology to cut costs and everything else. You want to talk a little bit about some of that?
Sure. So there's technology that are a system of sensors for occupancy. And these devices can be installed at the bottom of every desk. They only track if there's somebody there or not. You don't know who the person is. A lot of people are concerned about privacy in that sense. And the system of sensors can be used to understand who's coming into, how many people are coming into the office. Are people keeping socially distant? What is the duration of the occupancy? And they can help you understand how your real estate is being used when you do open back up, and then help you make predictive tools and tell someone like Jane or myself, we actually need more space or we need less space because we're using it too much or we're not using it enough. These sensors can tie into room or workstation booking software so that people can book a workstation ahead of time, and it eliminates the need for somebody to be managing this process or a shared calendar of sorts. And there's another technology that actually does a similar thing, but it actually tracks energy consumption. So this is another thing that's emerging and it is also very interesting. So it's actually tracking use according to how much, if people are plugged in and if their device is working. So you kind of track in two things. You track occupancy and you track energy consumption at the same time.
Okay. And one of the things, just to kind of clarify, so when you're talking about people booking space, almost like an airline where you have the seats and someone can electronically say, all right, today I'm going to be sitting in that seat, and you can then block out the seats that are not available. And
that's exactly it. That's exactly it. So you can choose to, for example, what we like to recommend is that people within a department. So for example, you want HR sitting with HR. You want your programs team to be sitting with your programs team. So the idea is that if those are going to be unassigned seats, if I am employee Margarida can only pick between these 12 workstations. So I cannot pick from anywhere in the office, but I can pick from this set of workstations where my team members are also going to be sitting.
Okay, and then this goes back to the mobile workforce you were talking about before. If people aren't going to be in the office on a readily basis, why do I really need to be paying for real estate when I can put 2 or 3 people in the same desk over the course of a year?
Right, okay. With an excellent maintenance and disinfection practice.
Thank you, yes. Jane, going back to you, I mean, again, we're talking, go ahead.
Piggyback one point about space, because it's often the second biggest expense in nonprofits' budget is the cost of real estate. So when we're talking about helping nonprofits survive with diminished cash flows and budgets being cut and grants being cut, I think that it's only makes sense to look at real estate within the larger context of overall operating. So I think in terms of shrinkage and what we actually need to have in terms of space for our organization, real estate should be something that's part of the overall plan.
Okay, and we'll talk about that in terms of leases and renegotiation, all that stuff. But there is a question that someone posted, and it kind of ties into what you just brought up. So when you're having these conversations about office space going forward, who's really driving those conversations? Is it the facilities and real estate? Is it operations? Is it human resources? Who's really driving the conversation about this office space, or who should be driving the conversation about this office space?
Typically, it's been the executive director of the organization who's working with the board and the COO. So it always has an eye towards fiscal operations and funding, and depends on the size of the organization if the COO is over operations or not. But it does typically tie back to the board and the executive director.
Sorry, guys, that's my stomach. I apologize for that. So in terms of, that, again, that conversation, I think it also comes down to really having a strong understanding of how the space is being utilized and who's utilizing that space within a business or a nonprofit organization. And if you have a large organization, especially one that maybe has satellite offices, so they're spread, it really then comes down to the need to do an inventory of your staff and really gain an understanding of how your staff are being utilized within the office. And I think Ámbar, I'm sorry, that's what you were kind of talking about before in terms of really taking an inventory and understanding, who are the mobile staff, how often people need to be in an office or need physical space.
Exactly.
And also the clients, I would say too, who you're serving. If people need to come in, if you're doing food distribution or medical checkups or what's happening in your space is also critical. I mean, certainly trainings can be done remotely, but I think the physicalness of your space is what is your mission? It has to tie back to your function.
Okay.
Absolutely. We have. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
For example, we're working on a medical suite, and we're working on a family visiting center and a training center. So these are, while yes, trainings can certainly happen online, and they are happening online right now, there will still be some trainings, for example, physical trainings, like how to restrain people with different abilities who might be acting up at a certain point in time. All these different things do most of the time need to happen in person. So how do you design a space for that is something that we're currently working on with some of our clients.
One of the really cool things, I was talking to an organization that does domestic violence, and with the pandemic and everybody staying at home, it's been very, very difficult for an individual who's being abused to actually make a phone call and get some level of counseling and stuff. So what they started to do is they started to open up little kiosks within the community that allowed for individuals to show up at the kiosk, and there would be a computer and stuff set up there where then they can just link into a counselor and have a conversation away from home where, so it's really created an environment where they can get more community based. And I think, Jane, that was something you were talking about earlier, the need to maybe be a little more community based and kind of move away from that centralized location to kind of meet the needs of the consumers that you're serving and the people who work for you.
What an interesting idea. I know about a suicide hotline that also was changed to text messaging because young people couldn't necessarily pick up a phone and get counseling. So what an innovative idea for domestic violence.
So one of the things that I said we would get back to, and if we can kind of jump into it here, and again, I think it comes down to like who's driving the bus here is, you do have organizations that are now in long-term leases. And they're now looking at those lease spaces, whether it be in a high-rise building where they can't get into the building at all, or they realize that people are working from home and they don't need as much space, and they may not need as much space going forward. What options do nonprofit organizations have how flexible or easy is it for them to go through and try to renegotiate a lease or anything like that? Thoughts?
So I think the first thing is communication with your landlord. Sort of hiding out is not very effective. So making sure that you're in touch with the landlord, kind of being very clear of what your fiscal capabilities really are. We've seen lots of different strategies and lots of different conversations that my firm has been part of. We also think the first thing is you've got to look at your lease. And we have an organization, Golden Brock and Iceman, that does free lease review, which we can include a link when we send out the links that Ámbar will be providing if anyone wants a professional review of their lease. There are lots of things that landlords are willing to do. We've seen things like 100% deferment of a few months, and you pay it back in late 2020 or 2021, deferring 50% of your rent to be paid 3 to 6 months through the remainder of your lease. If you have some term left on your lease and you know you want to stay in your space, renegotiating and extending your lease, possibly for a lower rate, with getting free rent now is another strategy. So making sure that you're not behind in your rent, and then figuring out strategies to communicate with your landlord. And certainly I understand people feel very stressed about paying rent, and landlords are also consumed with having to keep the building operational. So it has to be sort of a negotiation on a case-by-case basis. And we've had lots of conversations with landlords and our nonprofit partners to help them through these tough times.
And have you seen that landlords are willing to have these types of conversations?
Absolutely. And we set them up all the time and are part of the process to do that. So whoever you work with originally should be able to help you coordinate. And I think the most important thing is communication and having an open mind. For instance, if you feel that you won't be able to make up the rent over these months until a future point, really look at what you can afford. Is it 50%? Is it 25% reduction? Do you need 100% reduction? What's realistic for your organization? And then going through that time period, and then if you need to renegotiate in 6 months, just be able to pick up the phone and talk about that again. So we've seen lots of landlords being willing to talk about it.
When we go through
it's much more difficult to replace a tenant because it's hard to show space. They don't know who the entity is. It's been built out for you. So they have a lot of capital improvements built into your lease. So they're much more motivated to work things out with you than to lose you.
So in terms of, like, if you were putting together a kind of a process here, like what should be the process that organizations do to kind of go through this in terms of looking at what their needs are, how do they, address that? And what's the process that organizations should go through in preparing themselves to kind of have that conversation with the landlord?
First thing is to look at your lease, because there are provisions in your lease called holdover provisions. So for instance, if you stop paying rent and you're in the rears, meaning you owe rent, landlords can turn around and charge you an inflated amount, 150% of your rent, 200% of your rent, and no one wants that situation. So how do you prepare yourself? By looking at your budget and figuring out what you can afford, and then creating a long-term plan, at least a year to 2 years out, figuring out what's reasonable, what makes sense. And if you have too much space, can you sublet part of it? Can you help another nonprofit by coming in and relieving the burden to you? And then working with your treasurer or COO or your fiscal person to understand, based on the grants you receive, the timing. I have one organization that was very comfortable with paying off their lease by June 30th because the fiscal clock changed on certain grants by July 1st. So therefore, they made a plan that as of July 1st, they would take a rent reduction at that period of time. So getting current and then looking at the next round of when your pain points are as your organization. And certainly fourth quarter can be a good time for individual giving and looking at your development funds. Is that a period of time that you can come current So just really thinking about what the bite of the apple that you need to take that will help with the long-term vision of your organization. So it's really working with your development people, your fiscal people, and then understanding what your long-term picture can be.
Okay, so it's a team approach.
Absolutely, and starting with making sure you understand your lease.
Okay. When we're looking at nonprofits are looking at their space, what are the key issues that nonprofits should be considering in terms of space, where they select and those types of things? You know, what are the key things they should be thinking about when they're looking to find either new space or reposition space they have?
I would say the most important thing is that you don't do it at the last minute, that you give yourself enough time, a year and a half, a year, so that you have an opportunity to take all the factors into consideration. For instance, there are a few organizations that I've worked with that have made some huge mistakes and it didn't work out well for the organization based on where they relocated. I worked with this organization called Bottomless Closet, and they were in the Penn Station area, which was near a lot of transportation. And they got a good lease deal and they moved 52nd Street on the east side. And what happened is it killed all the workshops. Women weren't as interested in doing repeat visits. So what happened is programmatically they had to have a shift in the organization. So there's a huge impact on where you relocate and what the considerations are for your constituency base. So I would look at the catchment area really carefully. Transportation is a really important issue. And then, of course, costs and making sure that you can afford to make the move or renegotiate where your existing space is. And then the other key ingredient that I always try to work on is finding a cultural match for your organization with the landlord. I worked with an organization called Room to Grow, and this is a great organization. People drop off and bring books and strollers and clothing to children 0 to 3 years old. And they would come with, huge garbage bags full of treasures and walk through the lobby and jump on the elevator and bring these gifts to this organization. And then not one person from the family would come. The family would come with, 6 or 7 people to have counseling sessions, which was huge foot traffic. So the landlord was not receptive to this use and was very uncomfortable with the amount of foot traffic and clogging the elevators. So I was able to move them to a landlord that loves what they do. Not only do they donate, they help with pickups and deliveries and embrace the nonprofit. So a cultural alignment with the mission and a clear discussion with the landlord. Here's what we'll be doing in this space. Here are hours of operation. These are the kind of clients that we'll be seeing. This is when our employees will be here, so that there's no mystery. So all of that is done before a client even enters the space. If it's not aligned, it's not the right fit for the organization. So I think that's really important.
I agree. Ámbar, you mentioned earlier that you're seeing the need for reconfiguration of space in order to kind of bring people back. Is a lot of that reconfiguration, is that structural, non-structural? Because, again, a lot of the leases are going to require landlord approvals. Who's paying for those things? Is it something the landlord is doing or the organization is doing? How is all that kind of coming into play?
It's mostly non-structural, meaning we're not telling people they have to move walls and, demolish existing spaces. It is a lot more about having a plan for new ways to use and occupy your existing space. So as I mentioned before, making sure that there's empty seats between people. If you have to add temporary partitions at high traffic places, such as your reception area, or maybe any other service areas within your space, then you do that. The conference rooms. How do you use the conference room now? Do you put up signage that says, even though this conference room used to be for 6 people, now the capacity is for 2 people? So it's really about reinforcing new habits that are take place within the existing space when people come back. And the way you reinforce those is by making some minor modifications to the space in terms of movable items and signage. I can't stress enough the importance of what we call environmental graphics. So these would be signs that you would put on the walls,
we have things like
on the
this.
floors.
Do not sit here. Yeah.
Yeah. And ideally, they are not movable signs. So they are permanently affixed. They are permanently affixed to the walls or to the floor. And there are, we've been doing custom signage for our clients, but there are plenty of websites out there where you can order things or you can print them yourselves. I would recommend that you laminate them and you double stick tape them or something like that so that they cannot be removed.
And then in terms of, you were also talking about directional signs. So it's trying to figure out what the most effective way to control the flow of people through an office too. That has to kind of come into play too, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Directional signage, walking in one direction is highly encouraged. So having circulation or walkways that only go in one direction have been proven to be very effective so that you don't have people who are face to face, even with their masks on. If you're in a low-rise building, using one stair to go up and the other stair to go down, or elevator to go up and stair to go down, things like that really help. Elevator occupancy, if there were 4 people that could fit in there before, now it'll be 1 or 2 people. So really it's about reducing the density of people and keeping that social distance that has been proven to be effective.
And are you seeing that organizations are establishing policies surrounding that and disseminating those policies, and where do they get copies of those policies?
Absolutely. Everybody, I believe it's recommended by the CDC that you have to have a back to work safety plan, and that includes what's expected of employees and also what the workplace will be providing. And every employee should read, it should be disseminated in a workshop or a town hall or multiple town halls, depending on the size of your organization, the amount of questions that you have come about, and people should sign and acknowledge that they've received, read, understand, and will comply with this document.
And what should organizations, I know we've talked about a bunch of different things, but what other things should organizations be doing in order to improve the overall safety within the environment? I understand that, right now there's a lot of rules and regulations, and how do you filter through, obviously the CDC has set rules and stuff, but how do you filter through, there's so much noise out there, how do you filter through what should be done and what doesn't have to be done, what's the must and what's the best practices and the like?
If I had to boil it down to only a handful of things, I think it would be keeping socially distant, cleaning your air, filtering your air, and cleaning all of your surfaces, especially high touch surfaces.
And you said the cleaning of surfaces should happen multiple times a day?
Yes.
Okay. What are you seeing in terms of, with the nonprofits coming back to work? There's going to be places where people trip up. What do you see as the most likely trip ups or mistakes that you think the sector is going to make, and things that they should be thinking about?
I think that people are going to be happy to see each other if they, hopefully everybody works with coworkers who they like. I think people are going to be very happy to socialize, be away from their home, their children, and everyone they've been cooped up with. No matter how much they love them, they're going to be happy to see other adults. And I think that there could be trip ups in terms of keeping socially distant and wanting to congregate and have extended conversations, and forgetting that we're still living through a pandemic. So that would be one thing. Jane, I don't know if you have anything to add that you can think of.
I just read something that opening windows is really a very good thing to help people have real air and sunshine circulation. But I think Ámbar's right. People are so hungry to see each other. They want to approach each other, and you forget that you've got to have your mask on and you got to stay your distance. And the other thing I would add is procedures in your building. So you have your internal procedures, and then there's some external procedures. So you have to make sure people follow both, because you're sort of like, okay, I'm done now, I'm back in my office, and you forget. So just being conscious that it's an all day, all the time thing. Nothing has changed. The calendar has changed. So we have to keep everyone protected.
And everyone should make sure that they have a mask before they go into the office. They should wear a mask around their house. Make sure that it's a very comfortable mask for you. If it's not comfortable, get yourself another one or make modifications to it, because you will be wearing a mask for a long time, and that's the best way, that's the best thing we can do to protect each other.
Yeah, and again, I think you're still in a situation, and even here, we're an accounting firm, and even here, you've got people who are working with each other and training each other, and sometimes they forget, and you got to constantly remind people, hey, you guys are within 6 feet, you really should be wearing masks, and it's kind of getting in that thought process and getting in that mindset that that's something that you definitely need to make sure.
I think also the face shields are good too. People forget that those are a little more comfortable.
But if you're using the face shield, don't you still have to have a mask on underneath it, because the face shield doesn't stop the so I think it's
nodding. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of the two. So yeah, the face shield just provides an extra layer of protection, but it doesn't preclude the need for a mask, as far as I know.
Right.
So someone commented that ear guards make face masks more comfortable.
Mm-hmm. And we have faces in all shapes and sizes, and I've seen a lot of people wearing undersized masks, and that is concerning. The mask has to cover both your nose and your mouth at all times.
Yeah, it's you still walk into stores and you see people with it over their mouth and not their nose, and yeah. So, what do you see as some of the key takeaways that people really need to understand, both from a moving back into the work environment perspective, as well as being able to I guess effectively utilize their space and and everything else? What are the key takeaways that people should take away from today's meeting?
I would say communication is really important. Ongoing communication, helping people feel comfortable and kind of be a good example and make it seamless. So as Ámbar mentioned, the signage, reminding people and keeping it up all the time inside your work environment, I would say is really important. And same with talking to your landlord about your fiscal situation, really being open, making a plan together and customizing an approach. And sometimes nonprofits say things, for instance, oh, but my landlord is a donor. But that means that they're supportive of your organization, which is a good thing. So they're a friend to you and a friend to the work. So making sure that you're being as transparent with everything that's going on. And everyone wants you to succeed. This is a time where we need our nonprofits to be successful.
And again, on top of being successful, I mean, most of the nonprofit organizations right now, they understand that they're in a situation where the funds are just not flowing as the way they've been. So I think everybody has to understand, from a landlord or any perspective, that this is a tough environment for everyone, especially the nonprofit sector. Ámbar, did you have any other things that you wanted to add in terms of takeaways?
I think a continuous feedback loop is very important when you do open up your office at any capacity. So find a way where people can sort of have that little inbox, make sure it's digital, let people choose for it to be anonymous or not anonymous, and have them provide comments about how the return to the workplace is going, so that you can continuously improve and have everybody be heard.
So things like, do you feel safe, and just whatever the little questionnaire that you should have to give people an opportunity to kind of provide feedback.
It could be a questionnaire, or it could just be an inbox. What are your comments? Not necessarily via email, but maybe have it be some software, like even if it's just a Google poll or anywhere where you can look at it on a weekly basis and make sure that people are being heard and things are getting addressed. Like if they see that cleaning isn't taking place often, or if they're concerned about air, or if they're concerned that some of their colleagues aren't wearing masks, then you can make changes to protect the health and safety of everybody.
That's a great idea. It's not something I thought of. That's awesome. There is another question. Do either of your firms help nonprofits conduct surveys to better understand what employees want or need going forward from the office space they will be in?
Absolutely. We've been doing digital surveys. We also have interview questionnaires, and we can meet with heads of different departments to assess what they're hearing their teams need, both to work more effectively from home and when they return to the workplace.
Right. And what sort of things are kind of addressed? I mean, I know you touched on a couple of them, but what other things are addressed within those types of surveys?
So things like physical comfort, for example. How are you working from home? Do you have the right setup that you need? What else can we do to support your work style? When you come back into the office, why do you need to come back? How often will you need to be there? What is of most concern to you? It's really a short questionnaire to understand where people are. They're sort of pulse questionnaires. We can do a series of them, and it gives leadership an opportunity to hear from their staff and make the appropriate changes.
Awesome. Do you guys either of you have anything else you'd like to add? Because we're kind of running low on time here.
I guess I just want to say that, thanks everyone for listening to us. We all want you to be successful and survive this horrible pandemic, and to be safe and continue serving your community. And we're going to provide as many resources as we can to help you navigate this time.
Yeah. Anything you guys want to send over, we'll kind of, like I said, connect to this and kind of push out. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ken.
Guys, this was incredible. I really appreciate you coming on today and helping to educate the sector. Very, very informative information. Like I said, I was really, really excited about this topic. Everybody, if you tune in on August 13th at noon, our guests will be Jennifer Kenny and Maggie Madia, who will be discussing HR issues that you need to consider when you're reopening your new office, your offices again. And also things from a virtual perspective. So stay safe, and we'll see you in a month. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.